Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review Podcast. My name is Josh Rhodes, and I'll be your host on this journey across time in monster truck racing. Today, joining me, we've got Dan Cheech Agosh from Crush This, a monster truck podcast. Dan is also a crew member for Hall Brothers Racing and the Raminator and Ramunition monster trucks. Today, we're talking Hampton, Virginia, 1988. It's one of his favorites, and I can't wait to discuss it with him. Without further ado, though, let's get into the Retro Monster Truck Review. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review. My guest this week, Dan Cheech Agosh from Crush This, a monster truck podcast, as well as a crew member for the Raminator monster truck, one of the best independent teams on the circuit. Dan, how's it going, buddy?
Oh, doing pretty well. I'm really excited about this for some odd reason.
I can see by the smile on your face there, buddy.
Right. I mean, it's cool to go back. Very, very cool props for you two. 3 successful editions right now for this program, and it's pretty cool how we can go in depth. Not a lot of programs that ever go in depth in racing in general, and you finally came up with something that's pretty cool. And instead of going into the minds of the drivers like in my podcast, we go into the scenario through footage of monster truck racing. You know, like we're in a love of a sport that, compared to NASCAR and NHRA, the popularity of it is more of like a cult, I guess, following compared to that. So they have a lot of history. They have a lot of footage that you may have in the monster truck world. That type of footage is more private. Chris Parrish,
very hard to come by.
Give a props to Chris Parrish and Nick Davis and Kobe. I'm sorry, man, Marshall.
Kobe Marshall, yeah.
Yeah, being trusted with this stuff, and I'm on a long challenge it, man. I'm pretty excited about this, and I am pretty good. In this episode, when you release it, I will be in Corbin, Kentucky. So that is the monster. We call it it's the Monster Nationals, but they're called the Monster Truck Destruction. If you have a chance while listening to this podcast, you're not doing anything in Kentucky, come by Corbin, Kentucky. It would be 3 shows there. Just a little plug. But that's about it.
The promoter, Mr. Dan Cheech Agosh over here. Anyway, the event that we're talking about today, Langley Speedway, Hampton, Virginia, May 21st, 1988. This is actually show number 2 that is broadcast on air. It's a Power Tracks episode. Your lead announcer, Richard Leake. Your color commentator, Army Armstrong. But honestly, Army could do both jobs if he really wanted to. Let's just be honest there. Man, we got a stellar lineup here. And you actually pointed out whenever you asked to do this, I said, go ahead, pick a race. We'll cover whatever you want. And you picked this one. And you want to tell the people here at home exactly why you picked this one?
Yeah, I actually picked this one because there's a lot of key things. One, it was actually the very first monster truck show I ever been to. And I was like 1, not even less than 1. But my dad wanted to just go to a monster truck show and take my mom. Right? And they found out that I'm not crying. I'm actually they said that they were holding me. And I watched, just watched. I don't know. They just said this is the quietest I've ever been. So I guess I was a pretty big whiner. Still am today.
I can agree.
But there was key things I always liked about this show. Is one, we'll go on and talk about this. It was one of the first shows that I have noticed that the main star, the main focal point of this event wasn't Bigfoot. A lot of the TNT events prior to it or during the season was focusing on Rich Hoosier and Bigfoot or Jim Kramer and Bigfoot. This time it wasn't. Okay, so don't get me wrong. The difference I always thought of this one compared to St. Paul was the focal point was still Bigfoot. Later on, that truck we will talk about took over that event and people cheered it on. This was a clear start from the program. Also, I thought this was a good point in the 88 season. It was the television debut of the second gen USA #1 monster truck, but the
Mm-hmm.
second event for Rod Litzow. We talked previously that he drove the night beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people may not know that the USA 1 #2 truck ran previously under a different driver. Uh, and then another two more points I picked this event. It kind of showed I don't know how to say this, but showed that Bigfoot was vulnerable. He wasn't, the showing the people, hey, you're just like everyone else. Even though you have that Ford backing, um, maybe there was stories behind maybe the United States Hot Rod Association was delivering more money to Bigfoot to do what they needed to do, and they wasn't taking the TNT event seriously until later on they found out we need to take this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so maybe that was a problem. I just thought in that event, you kind of saw the roller coaster of a situation that Bigfoot was having. Instead of being on the very top, they were having their ups and downs, which at the end of the season, 88, was a down season. It was an embarrassing year for Bigfoot. Bigfoot was known for winning. You see what happens later on. And then my last point was the future of TNT. I think this was something that touched the water on TNT. When Josh, you go over the field, the trucks that are on this field, you would see later on that becomes the 89, 90 field that you would normally see if you take out maybe 3 trucks and fill those in with the 89 champion and a couple of maybe one top Ford and another top truck. You pretty much have a regular consistent field that you would see the rest of the TNT years. So
Exactly.
I thought
you have trucks here that you would normally see in the next 3 years, and I'll just go ahead and list them right here. Starvin Marvin Smith and Stomper #2, Bennett Clarkson, the original Clydesdale. This is the old blue and gray truck. It's a phenomenal looking truck. Honestly, I wished he would have stayed with this paint scheme throughout the rest of his career. But anyway, John Moore, No Problem #1, Rich Hoosier, Bigfoot #4, it seems to be a recurring truck on this podcast, Dennis Anderson and Grandma Gravedigger, Paul Huffaker, just showing off, Rod Litzow, USA 1, Ron Dennis and Leadfoot, Gary Porter, Carolina Crusher #1, Robbie Giles and Southern Storm, and Scott Stevens and King Crunch.
That's a stack lineup just
That's
for that.
a huge stacked lineup. One thing too to notice here is all these names are legendary. With no offense to some of them, with the exception of some of them, they aren't quite up there yet. Ron Dennis, Robbie Giles, they're names that you remember, but they're not names that you remember for going out and winning every week. Names like Scott Stevens, technically an originator in the sport, but not somebody that at this time you're going to be like, oh, he can go out and win this race easy. No Problem, another example. This is No Problem 1. This is, again, I've said it before, it's the boat. It had a propeller on the back of it at one point. Not necessarily a truck that's going to be going out there and competing for victories, even though it looks very good in this event. And Southern Storm, Army says it throughout this broadcast quite a bit here, this truck. It just seems like there's a chassis problem on the truck. He even says at one point he thinks there's too much air in the tires.
Mm-hmm. One thing I also noticed is this kind of reminds me, this show kind of reminds me of the 1991 show. You remember in 91 they had the transition of coilover nitrogen shocks versus stage 2 versus stage 3. In this show, you'll see a lot of stage 1 versus stage 2, and you can definitely tell like how you just kind of dissect the bracket here. There is a lot of stage 1 trucks. I put on quotations because one truck that kind of wins the event is a half and half. Same thing with Bigfoot 4, I guess you would say, but that's considered
4
stage
was like
2.
almost a stage 1.5 at this point.
Yeah. Same thing with USA 1 too.
Yeah, very true. The show opens with Army Armstrong and Richard Leake standing in front of a green screen projection with B-roll footage kind of playing in the background. List of field trucks, including Gravedigger, who at this time is located in Chesapeake, Virginia. And I actually Google mapped this, a half hour away from Hampton. It's a hometown crowd here, basically, for Dennis. And this is USA 1's first appearance on the TNT circuit with rookie driver Rod Litzow behind the wheel. Rod, of course, would go on to greater fame later in his career. But today, fresh-faced rookie who is very nervous, and you can see it in an interview that he has later. Bigfoot 4 comes into this evening event leading the 1988 TNT point standings. We get a qualifying highlight here of Stomper right as we get ready to go to commercial break. And honestly, we didn't know it at the time because they don't announce it until later in the show. But this is the only time you're seeing Stomper on this track at all. This is the only run Stomper makes. It appears to be broken before it actually comes out to compete against Southern Storm later in the event. Upon returning from commercial break, we see the runs of Clydesdale, No Problem, and Bigfoot 4 making passes as they list the bracket for the evening. And the bracket is a little surprising, and it touches to what you said earlier about Bigfoot not quite being the star. Gravedigger, Grandma, top qualifier here in this 11-truck field.
Also want to branch out here is two things. One, the top 3 in points. We even talked off and on here. They really don't explain about point standings, but like you said before, Bigfoot 4 was a top points person, but second was Gravedigger, and third was just showing off. So the top 3 in points were here. And also, how about, really don't explain about this, but how about the weather? The weather was perfect for a truck named Gravedigger.
Exactly. It's starting, the fog's starting to roll in. Those red lights are clearly visible. Even though Dennis doesn't have it on, have them on in this buy run, that truck is still standing out in the fog. And it's something to behold. As we run down the rest of the lineup here, though, we got Just Showing Off taking on Clydesdale, USA 1 and Leadfoot. Carolina Crusher is going to take on No Problem. Southern Storm's going to get a buy run here as Stomper doesn't come to the line. And then a rivalry that went on for years, Bigfoot and King Crunch.
Yeah, that's a nice lineup there. There's some definitely we'll go through later on a little bit of the first round, a little bit of controversy, we may say.
Oh yeah, definitely. Dennis Anderson here is interviewed by Army Armstrong. Interesting to note that Richard Leake calls Dennis the pole sitter. It's the only for Army in the interview to completely denounce that term and say in monster truck racing, explaining that we have a quick qualifier, and that's what Dennis Anderson is here. Dennis calls it early, saying that the left lane is going to be the favored lane tonight. He takes note that he is also, actually, I'm going to take note here, that he's also wearing that old white famous J.C. Whitney fire suit with the red stripe on it. The story goes, and Dennis said this on the 25th anniversary Gravedigger DVD, that suit went to, I believe it was Bob Breen from Breen Boys Racing Toys, and it's somewhere maybe still located in the St. Louis area to this day. It could be it could be at one of the Breens' houses. We don't know.
Probably Gene Patterson has it.
Say that again?
I said probably Gene Patterson has it. He has a lot of stuff.
He better give it to me.
And that foul play hat.
We see Gravedigger's buy run. We see Gravedigger's buy run here, and Anderson doesn't have the lights on. I guess that doesn't mean it's at 100%. No, I'm just kidding. Dennis runs really smooth here. He's going to obviously save the equipment, and you get a little burp of the throttle over the last cars to say, hey, you know what? I'm still here. This is just me setting my own pace, I guess you could say. Dennis is definitely going to be a threat here this evening, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he was. He was pretty fast. You see in the next couple of races that he gets himself into before the little gremlin that he had throughout his early monster truck career came back and said, "Hey, you missed me." But he wanted that quick qualifying time. You know, TNT, I guess, was starting on that point. So when you did qualify, you get that extra money for number one. So that really helped him out in there. But he became someone that I don't think during that night that pretty much, if it wasn't for his wrongdoing, I don't know if anyone could have touched him.
Very true. One thing I'll point out here too is at the beginning, not necessarily this event, but at the beginning of the season for TNT, Dennis was looking really good. He'd won an event in Richmond on the second day. He finished second the first day to Bigfoot. I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of discrepancies after that Richmond race of what exactly happened in between there before we actually get here to Hampton. But Dennis is off to a good start. Obviously, we said he's second place in points. Third place in points, though, future Gravedigger driver Paul Huffaker. interviewed here. They actually asked him whether or not he was holding back in qualifying. And interesting explanation. Huffaker says that they had a bad batch of fuel and they're running low and they are cutting it close to making it for the entire weekend. Have you guys ever, this is a curious question. Has you guys ever gotten any bad batches of methanol?
No, VP really takes care of us, and we really don't try to push. We haven't been on that end of the stick where our fuel calculations went down. That we've been pretty good about that, but we had teams where, during some shows saying, "Hey man, can we borrow some fuel from you? I can't make it for the weekend," which has happened before, and we have supplied them with some fuel. But no, for us on the team, we normally try to calculate, and VP really takes care of us on our fuel situation.
First race of the night here, just showing off, and Clydesdale. First Chevy versus Ford matchup of the night. They're going to plug this quite a bit in the evening. Ford in the left lane, Chevy in the right. Whole shot goes to Pablo, a.k.a. Paul Huffaker, in the just showing off for Bennett Clark. Surpasses him, though, over the first set of cars in a big way. This is probably the hardest I have ever seen that original Clydesdale truck run. Bennett flies over this 10-car stack right here and flies into the second set, but I think we can both agree here, Bennett probably should have been disqualified.
Yeah.
The rule discrepancy here was a little different. I don't understand why, because his right front tire is the only one that hits that first jump, and then all four tires are off in the middle portion of the track here, and Bennett actually has a wild ride, gets up on the nose, there's almost a flash fire underneath the truck. Amazing run from Bennett. It kind of reminds me of a Dennis Anderson style run, which you never really saw from Bennett. That truck was always consistent. But here, I don't understand why he wasn't disqualified.
I don't know either. That was another questionable call. I thought actually the truck was originally broke. They did use that scene a lot from Bennett in a lot of promo videos too, just like the previous episode you talked about with Crimson Crusher. They did a lot of promos, especially that Turning the Power on VHS that they had promoting their season in '88. But go off with just showing off. I think there was a lot of situations. I think Pablo was okay of getting beat, but it seemed like with luck had it, even though he had the bad fuel, he kept on moving on, except for
it was a very consistent truck, and you'll see that evolve in TNC down the road, where the consistent trucks seem to always pull off either a victory or they're coming into the semifinals or final round a lot. Bennett Clark after this says, it came down, the back end came up real high. All I was looking at was the dirt. All I could do was hold the gas to the floor and hope it drove itself out from under it. Very true statement. I mean, I don't know how much more you could say right there as far as what Bennett had to do to keep that truck on all fours.
Yes, and still that role comes to play today, outside of the two-wheel still conversation. But when you're in trouble and you're looking at the ground, the best option for you to do is to get out, is throttle out. I mean,
when in doubt, throttle out. There you go.
But it was pretty
Next race though, USA 1 in Leadfoot. I want to talk a little briefly about Leadfoot. Up until this event, there had been a few shows on TV where you saw the Leadfoot El Camino just flat lose a tire. Like, they could hardly keep the tires on this truck. This event, thankfully, Leadfoot doesn't lose a tire. But the whole shot, no surprise at all. Here goes to the USA 1 Chevrolet. Rod leads Ron over the first set of cars by about a truck length. Leadfoot then dies between the car stacks and kind of rolls up to the last car stack. Then USA 1 all of a sudden appears to just completely die and idles across the finish line to win. So you've got one of the favorite trucks going into this having issues, but a competitor unable to capitalize.
Right. With another thing is on one of your notes quotes. I mean, same thing on mine. He was also having fuel issues too. It seems like the altitude in Virginia was causing some issues there too. And later on in the series or the event, they do interview Hot Rod, and you can also notice in that run, he probably had the butterflies, the rookie jitters. You can tell that him and that truck wasn't quite yet, as I guess you'd say, one, and that was you still see it, but still a win.
Oh yeah, still a win there. The next race, Carolina Crusher, Gary Porter, the original Carolina Crusher, and in my opinion, Carolina Crusher number 1 just as consistent as Carolina Crusher number 2 that would come later, and then No Problem, the original No Problem, also a consistent truck, but to be fair, probably not in the same league as Carolina Crusher here. Crusher's out big on the start, No Problem. Kind of a little slow off the line, but once Gary actually, it appears to back off just a little bit on that first set of cars after he lands, and No Problem starts to catch up. But Gary maintains that distance the rest of the race, and just as I put in my notes here, stayed planted from point A to point B.
See, the last two events, last two races, was a mixture of questionable stage 2 trucks against stage 1, and you can definitely see that with Carolina Crusher and No Problem. Later on in the season, he extends the Carolina Crusher chassis to become what you would see later on with number 2, but his technology on his truck was a little bit more up to date than No Problem 1.
The good news about No Problem 1, though, is after the event, if he wanted to, he could go fishing. Stomper and Southern Storm, as I said earlier before the commercial break, Richard Leake actually points out and says both Stomper and Bigfoot are featured in the next 2 pairings. TNT pushing Stomper is just absolutely no surprise, but this is just tease here that makes no sense as they come back from commercial and we see Robbie Giles going and having a buy run. The reason? Stomper broke in qualifying, and they just now received word of this. This is an edited together broadcast. They honestly, I hate to call them out here. I know it's years later, but there's a little bit of false advertising on their part to just completely ignore the fact that Stomper was broken.
Right. And like we have talked about, Stomper's their baby. You see it in high school sports where the head coach's son's not really good at it, but he's going to still push him, even though average Joe is more of a 5-star player than this guy, but they're going to still push him, even though the guy, no offense, but it was a perfect example with Stomper. It was a lot of promises and no after effect.
Exactly. I want to make a note here. I know I've been pretty hard on Stomper in the last couple of episodes. I'm being hard on the truck itself. I'm not being hard on the drivers at all. Those drivers, Marvin Smith especially, put his heart and soul into these vehicles to keep them going.
Correct.
And a lot of respect for both Marvin Smith as well as any other driver that hopped behind the wheel of Stomper. Robbie Giles is interviewed here, and Army Armstrong seems to indicate that there's a problem with the chassis in the interview. However, moments earlier during the run, he thought maybe there were too much air in the tires. Kind of hard to diagnose what's going on here with Southern Storm. I do want to really say, though, that beautiful looking truck.
One of the few trucks also that have ran a dual engine setup where it could have been maybe, he actually, some put the dual engine for show. I think he was one of the only ones that actually used the dual engine setup for racing. Maybe he put too much power, or maybe just the truck was not handling right. But there was a lot of question marks that they were trying to figure out during his run, even in the interview there, Josh.
Oh yeah, there was. After researching it a little bit, Giles had mentioned that he had a really good run the night before. Giles actually made it to the quarterfinals on the previous night, losing to Dennis Anderson's Gravedigger. Bigfoot 4 and King Crunch here. Last week's show on Louisville 1990, I kind of explained the rivalry that would become later between these two trucks, King Crunch and Bigfoot. Here in 1988, it's a drastically different set of circumstances. Bigfoot 4 is clearly the most technologically advanced truck in this battle, and King Crunch isn't even close to being up to the standards of the King of the Monster trucks here. Ironically, Stevens is racing the exact same Bigfoot truck. He's racing the exact same Bigfoot truck here that he would in that 1990 race that I spoke of. Number 4 here, though, is sporting my personal favorite look, with the blue body, the white rims, the silver chromed out planetary covers. My favorite look by far of any Bigfoot truck. Bigfoot also is revealed here to be the second quickest qualifier, and King Crunch the 7th. Massive hole shot from Bigfoot 4 and Rich Hoosier here. Stevens, I want to know what exactly was going on with King Crunch here, by the way. A couple of times on this night, you can see this truck stutter on the line. Honestly, I believe it's probably a fueling issue. They've
It
talked
could.
about the fuel issue before, and it could be, honestly, now that I'm talking about the 1990 race, kind of a mixed reversal here.
Right. And also the story later on in the season, also on a note is Scott put a bigger motor in that lightweight truck of his.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he put that motor in during that time period and could have been dealing with fuel issues, but I knew he was really. It seemed like that truck was really hard to control when he put that big motor in that truck.
Oh yeah, and honestly, here it looks like he may have already had that big motor in the truck because once he does get going, that first set of cars, Stevens airs it out trying to catch Bigfoot, and he does this a couple of times in the evening. He just absolutely airs it out. But when he knows he's out of the race, he kind of backs off over the second set of cars, and Bigfoot's clearly your winner here going into round number 2. Rich Hoosier is interviewed. He's saying that the cars that are now beat down makes the track rougher. Excuse me, edit. Rich Hoosier is interviewed here saying that now that the cars are beat down, it's making the track rougher, so they have to jump farther each time to make it a much smoother drive. Army asks Rich about his safety equipment, and he points out a few things: a single-layer Nomex fire jacket, Bell racing helmet, and an item that he lets Rich explain, which is basically a specifically made neck brace, as well as something that he's got hanging off his arm, which is what he describes as something to help keep from getting bruises because he's got his arm hanging out the window right here. Just to compare, Dan, because you're working on a current monster truck team, what's different about the safety features here that he has versus today?
Oh, really? The only difference now today is, I mean, now the drivers don't sit on the left side of the truck, so that elbow arm thing that doesn't bruise. But really, you're eliminating maybe 2 items. That's the neck brace and that arm thing. Drivers still today, still wear a kidney belt
Mm-hmm.
underneath their fire suit, and instead of some drivers still wear maybe a neck brace underneath their Hans device. Is a Hans device or R3 device that they hook onto their helmet that straps onto their belt, where they will basically become one with the truck and will have less head movement, less neck pains in the neck and etc. like that. Eliminates body movement. But with the technology that they have now, is crazy. But compared to the driver safety back in '88, not really. I mean, maybe few items here and there, but the products themselves just been updated.
Very true. Um, excuse me, another edit. We flashed to an interview earlier in the day conducted with Dennis Anderson, probably one of the more famous interview in Dennis's career. To be truthful here, Dennis explains that Gravedigger is a '51 Ford panel truck. When you look down the field of monster trucks, everything's a pickup. Chevrolet, Ford, basically the same. So I figured I've got to do something different to stand out a little bit. And honestly, I don't think he could have picked anything better to stand out with other than that. That truck stands out to this day. There is a reason it is still the most popular monster truck in the world. Army points out that Dennis has a different engine location than everybody with a rear engine design. Dennis replies with, when I hit the cars and launch, it keeps my front end up in the air a little bit better, a lot easier on the drivetrain, kingpins, things like that. With the weight transfer, I'm not slamming down on the front end as hard. This part, though, is the most famous part of the interview, and I think it's what really gives the Gravedigger the character that it would eventually become. Army says, we understand that there's going to be some names that start to show up on the sides of the tombstones on the Gravedigger. Is there any truth to that? Dennis, well, we talked about it. I've got a few tombstones reserved for a few people out here, some of my monster truck buddies. There's a lot of tombstones on the side of that truck, and I can think of a certain blue truck that might be one of the first ones that goes on there.
Right. I think he kind of put a lot of the trucks that he raced against racing rivals and stuff like that on his tombstones. A lot of trucks changed throughout the time, but today's Gravedigger still has competitors on the tombstone, just different names.
It's part of the iconic imagery of that truck. I mean, the paint scheme's changed a little bit over the years, but it's still basically the same design from Fred Buman on this old truck that we've got right here, Grandma. We go into the quarterfinals, though. Speaking of the Gravedigger, he's got fast loser Scott Stevens and King Crunch right here. Crunch back to being a fast loser. Looks like 1 of 2 for this round, fast losers. Crunch lags a little bit off the start again compared to Digger, and Grandma is out by about a half a truck over the hill. Dennis is first to the cars, jumps, lands on them before Stevens can jump onto the first stack. Richard Leak, another famous call here. The crowd loves Dennis Anderson and the Gravedigger. The way he says that, you can hear the crowd in the background as he says that, too. I know that they had to have done that on purpose in editing in this episode.
Pretty good editing.
Oh, very, very good editing. Very good editing. You can hear the crowd in the background. You can hear the voice, Richard Leake's voice, raise a little bit to try to, like he's speaking over the crowd, like he's at the event, kind of a deal. I love the call. Dennis hits the final car stack, and this is where I think you hear, and at least I heard it anyway. I think I hear a slight over revving of the motor here.
I did,
but
too.
Dennis wins convincingly over Scott Stevens.
Right. About that, the fan audio, that's probably one promoter right now in the wrestling world is probably still using those fans, that crowd level for their programs on Monday and Friday nights. Anyway,
I think I heard it Sunday night too.
But like you said on this, I mean, the thing is also, if you notice how smooth his qualifying run. Even though it may not take away his buy run just to save parts, but he was still smooth. Mm-hmm. How smooth Dennis was driving his Gravedigger truck compared to everyone else. I think the closest person that was that consistent and being smooth was probably Gary Porter.
Very true. Porter, actually, while we're here, we may as well talk about Gary for just a second. Gary actually won the first day's competition in Carolina Crusher, defeating Bigfoot in the finals. Porter's truck is very smooth, very consistent. Digger's looking smooth and consistent. Bigfoot is smooth and consistent. And when Rod can get a pass going, he's smooth and consistent in USA 1 as well. He feels the track. Dennis feels the track is coming around. He's not going to change gears, which I believe Grandma had a quick change gearbox on it. So if Dennis wanted to, he could go in and put a higher or lower gear in between rounds. And he can remove that, or he get that done rather quickly by just removing a couple of bolts and sticking a bigger gear in if he really wanted to. But I think it was geared perfect for this event. I think he had it dialed down here. Like I said, though, that revving of the motor kind of scared me a little bit, though, even watching this the first time I watched it years ago.
Mm-hmm. And it could have been a questionable call for later on in the event.
Yep. USA 1 and Clydesdale here. Army with another classic Armyism. We're going to call this one the Battle of the Butterflies. Both drivers got to be a little bit nervous. The reasons that they're nervous, USA 1, rookie driver, first time that Rod Litzau's been in the second round against another truck. Clydesdale, I think Bennett's nervous just because I don't know if thinks he can make it down the track after that first pass that he had.
Mm-hmm. He had butterflies from that. And still, back in the day, a lot of the drivers would have known how to handle that outcome. They're worried about, am I going to break something else? Am I going to go over? As for how young I was, I don't know what time between rounds was like. It's not like how we do in Monster Jam, Josh, where it's before.
Yeah, they want you out there. They want you out there 30 seconds ago.
Mm-hmm. Their racing is done within 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we're off to two-wheel or best trick competition. Everything's on the fly. So I don't, maybe if anyone's listening and feedback with me and Josh, some of the guys, please give us maybe can give us a rough estimate on what time between a TNT round racing was like between rounds. Because it could affect some guys, which obviously in this battle between USA 1 and Clydesdale, it did affect Bennett pretty well.
Yeah, it affects Bennett here. USA 1, again, no surprise. Quickest one off the line. Clydesdale, not a very smooth run from Clydesdale. Very smooth from USA 1, though. Straight down the track, point A to point B for USA 1. Very smooth. Clydesdale goes off to the side a little bit of the cars here, and you can kind of see Bennett's just, the last set of cars is just kind of crawling over the hoods, it looks like, as he's going to the finish. Like, all right, I had my fun the first round. I'm going to kind of back it off. I know I've lost here. I'm just going to kind of slowly ride it here. Rod is interviewed, says it feels really good. Said he had a battery issue that he solved right before that pass. And Army points out that the winners are all coming from the left side of the track, which is the case for every race except for the race that is the controversial race, which is Clydesdale and Just Showing Off. Army, though, asks Rod, is there a good side and a bad side to the competition tonight? And Rod replies, I definitely think so. I believe that picking the inside track, I'm used to it. It's working. Army finishes the interview, and then we get a voiceover from Army, and he closes it by showing a close-up of the rear end of USA 1. You actually see a little bit of an oil leak underneath USA 1 here, which not surprising in race vehicles, Dan.
No. The saying goes, if it's not leaking, there's something wrong. Exactly. Especially in the monster truck world, unless you know how to fix it and it's a clean-looking truck. But a lot of times in the world of racing, and definitely in monster trucks, a leaking is a good sign of saying, hey, it's working.
Exactly. I forget the story here, but I remember somebody, there's a famous race car, I want to say, they purchased it and they ended up getting rid of it immediately because when the guy went to store it, he didn't realize that it had an oil leak. And when the guy, God, I wish I could remember that full story now, but I remember the guy that bought it got it for a really good deal, but it was a really famous race car. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, let me know about it. All right, shoot me a message. Retro MT Review. Anyway, Carolina Crusher and Southern Storm. Porter, obviously in the left lane, launches very smooth out of the hole ahead of Robbie Giles here. Honestly, Giles just all over the place. Right, left. He's not staying straight. Obviously, there's something wrong here with Southern Storm. I'm going to go and say Army was correct about maybe too much air in the tires because it just seems like the truck is bouncing all over the place. Plus, let's be fair, it didn't have quite the suspension on it that Carolina Crusher does here. Crusher goes on to take the easy second round win.
Yep. Kind of another topic of stage 1 versus kind of a stage 2 truck. Southern Storm was really set up as a show truck. Mm-hmm. A lot of the guys during the dual engine setup, I mean, like Goliath and I don't know, maybe a couple other trucks, they normally did the side act where they get outside the truck, they turn the other motor in the back, and like they were like, oh, he gets double the horsepower, and do that. Maybe it does come to truth that they had both motors in, but it was mostly for show than anything else.
Yeah, I agree here. I will say that the restored Southern Storm looks really good as well. If anybody's ever seen photos of Southern Storm currently, that blue body, the white rims with the blue accent on the outside of the rim, beautiful looking truck. This truck is still around. Unfortunately, Carolina Crusher 1 is not. Army asks Gary how it's going, and he echoes exactly what Rod and Dennis both have said about the left lane being superior. Army asks him if he has a lane choice in the next round, which they specifically have stated, determined by the quicker time from the previous round where Gary would go. Just simply replies to the left lane. Simple answer, straight to the point, just like Gary Porter has always been.
Right. And you also you start seeing how Gary Porter is going to be kind of his nickname of Mr. Consistency. And even from the beginnings of Carolina Crusher 1 and 2, he sold the truck to Paul Schaefer. He was always consistent. And you know what's also consistent? That yellow and red fire suit.
Yep. Gary has always had that yellow and red fire suit until he went to go drive a certain black and green truck, but that's a story for another day. I really do wish that Carolina Crusher 1 was still around. I wish Carolina Crusher 2 was still around. Unfortunate circumstance of what happened with 2 after it was sold. But, man, just some beautiful looking trucks. I would love to see a couple of clones of those trucks come out someday. Either 1 or 2. Honestly, if you're going to restore one of them, restore the TV Star, restore number 2, rebuild that truck up to its former glory. That thing would look amazing in the Monster Truck Museum and Hall of Fame. Next race, though.
Oh, before you go, Josh, don't quote me, but I think Gary has one of those chassis. I don't think it's 2. I think it's the modified 1. There's pictures of it. I'm not too knows, but I've heard through the grapevine that I believe he has that in his backyard.
Okay, well, Gary Porter, if you happen to listen to this podcast, we know of a chassis that needs restoring.
I think he owns it. I
Okay,
think he
well,
owns it.
he needs to restore it, or somebody else needs to help him out with that, because that would be something to behold, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy seeing it. Bigfoot 4 and Just Showing Off here. Interesting that Just Showing Off is a fast loser, even though we both agree he should have won in round one. Second quickest loser here from round one. But honestly, though, taking on Bigfoot is a tall order for Just Showing Off here, even though I will say Pablo gives it a heck of a pass. And honestly, surprised the heck out of me whenever I watch this back and he actually wins.
Right. But I mean that the first this is another shot of what TNT used a lot of their promos too. It was on the VHS too also, but it was kind of weird on this event because in the first half of it, you could see clearly that maybe Pablo is still dealing with the fuel situation, the bad batch of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Bigfoot was ahead of him, but the second half was a completely different story. And
Bigfoot loses front steering here. It veers off to the left. Right front tire does catch the ramp, but foot's done at this point. Doesn't even cross the finish line. Pablo knows that he's in the race, but there's really one thing I want to point out here too. Visibility at this stage in the event has to be going down for these drivers. There's fog rolling in, and there's really only one big light that's really focused mainly on the center of the track right here. So I'm 100% positive that Pablo cannot see to his left and does not know that Bigfoot is out of this race, because Pablo charges hard in that right lane and just flies over that second set of 10 cars. And when he lands, does a lot of damage to the rear end, and you actually see the rear tires just flopping around in the back.
You also notice, like you said, with the lighting, kind of towards the more of the semifinals and finals, you can definitely see the left lanes pretty much. You can't really see anything unless you see a little bit of light towards the front of where the trucks are parked at. Rest of the time, it's pitch black. So yeah, you're pretty much, Pablo probably didn't know where he was at. I think in his interview he even stated that. But it's a key turning point in this event, because Bigfoot was number one in points and Just Showing Off was number 3. So if Pablo put his stuff together and continued on, this would maybe have some huge applications of points that would have happened, because it could have been a lot of topics. What happened if and Gravedigger was number 2, so 2 and 3 were still moving on. 1 was knocked out.
Exactly. Pablo actually echoes what you just said. He said he didn't know exactly what happened to Bigfoot. He was just mashing the motor as hard as he could. Declared the winner. Ironically, though, when you look back at his round 1 pass and the truck that he lost to, hiking up onto the nose, Pablo almost echoes exactly what happened with Clydesdale, except Pablo was legal and the truck stayed straight over the cars, even though the nose was what come down extremely hard. Unfortunate, though, the breakage, both trucks broken, and now, because of that, they have to go back again and look for a fast loser.
And surprise, surprise there, right?
Exactly. Right before we get into the semifinals here, it is explained that Pablo Huffaker and Just Showing Off will not be back to the next round after suffering damage. Bigfoot cannot take its place due to losing front steering. Costly round for both trucks. Before that, though, we get into semifinal number 1 here. Speaking of costly, unfortunately, Gravedigger and USA 1, local hero versus rookie. Second time these two trucks have matched up in a racing situation. The first time was day before, and Dennis won the race. Today, same thing. Dennis goes out, wins the race. USA 1 kind of bounces off to, he bounces to the left side of the cars on the first hit. And when he comes off the cars, he's veering to the right a little bit. And that's where Dennis just piles on the lead, takes the win. You see those red headlights glowing in the fog. And then the issue happens, and you see a bunch of smoke come pouring out of the back of Grandma Gravedigger. And Dennis, unfortunately, right afterwards, as Army's interviewing him, says that he believes he basically threw a rod in the motor, and he's done.
Right. And a little bit detailed on that. He had that race won. I was a little, when I saw this event on later on when I was a kid, I was like, what are you talking about? It looks like the truck's perfectly good. But Dennis said otherwise. And the cool thing I liked about the interview with Army and Dennis basically said, I'm out, I'm done. how Army did it is still show belief to the fans that Dennis can still come out. If you
Mm-hmm.
listen to his interview with Dennis, Dennis is like, I think I'm out. And then, kind of Army goes, well, let's see. I mean, even though
Yeah.
we kind of know the fate of it already happened, Army still kind of, I like that about that interview that he had, because Army still made me and maybe others watching it believe maybe Dennis can come back.
Yeah, but even I don't know. I see where you're coming from there, but honestly, when Dennis says, "Hey, I'm done. I threw a motor," I don't know that at that point he can come back.
Right,
It
right,
kind of
right.
goes back to what we were talking about last week. I forget the race. Oh, it was Clydesdale when Clydesdale lost the tire in Louisville.
Hmm.
Scott Douglas basically is he out for the entire event, and Army's like, "Oh yeah, he's done."
Right, right. But just how Army did, we all knew that Dennis was out. I mean, there's
Yeah,
no way. But Army still tried to put a bandage over a huge cut in the blood. It's still going
yeah.
out.
There's a huge cut there involving a lot of motor oil leaking out onto the ground from the gravedigger. Unfortunately, Richard Leak does confirm and say we do in fact know that Dennis Anderson won't be back. Shocker. Anyway, Carolina Crusher, King Crunch coming back. Crunch third time. This is one of those famous TNT deals where a guy basically could lose his way to the final. Unfortunately, doesn't happen though. King Crunch has not won a race all night. The trend's going to continue here for Scott Stevens, even though he does try again incredibly hard to come back on Gary Porter after the truck stutters yet again on the line. Porter, again, point A to point B, very smooth. Honestly, I cannot believe that. And we'll get into this when we get to the final here, but I'm still trying to understand how Gary Porter doesn't have lane choice in the final after a smooth run like that.
Definitely. I mean, definitely. Caroline Crusher had a faster and smoother pass than USA One. USA One looked more against Gravedigger like a GPS recalculating, because he was all over the track. Dennis was
Exactly.
smooth as going on, and obviously, if you watch the back with Dennis and USA One, USA One was off kiltered, off to the left, mostly, and had to recorrect. By that time, Dennis and his Gravedigger truck was almost two truck lengths ahead of USA One,
Mm-hmm.
and kept on pulling. I agree with you, Josh. I'm still trying to question what was the logic on giving Caroline Crusher the bad lane when Carolina Crusher had the faster truck, a lot smoother pass, and still, it's I guess water over the bridge, but it's pretty cool to hear maybe what Gary's side of that situation would have been.
Exactly. And honestly, after I watched this race, I hunted down Gary Porter's email address and I emailed Gary Porter. I have not yet gotten a reply. I hate to break it to everybody. I think everybody was probably waiting with a belated breath there going, oh my God, what does Gary Porter have to say after the fact? I don't have it yet. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, Gary reads that and he gets back to me. But it would be interesting to know if he does remember what happened here and why all of a sudden, because he even says so earlier in the night, I'm going to go to the left lane if I have lane choice.
Uh-huh.
I can't understand how he doesn't have lane choice here. It's just more. There's some early TNT, and I think you'll agree with me. There's some inconsistencies that go on in this event. There were a few.
Right, right, right. And I think, like we talked about before, I think this event also uh, mainstay the rest of the year to become some rule changes, like the 2-2 rule.
Yes. And I had spoken previously to a few people about that 2-2 rule because uh, going all the way back to the first round here, we're gonna talk about it anyway because it's still something that just boggles my mind how that obvious of a penalty isn't called. Um, as far as everyone had spoken to me goes, and I'd spoken to Chris Parrish about this, I'd spoken to Nick Davis about this, and they said that that rule was in effect as of Richmond,
That's
which
interesting.
Richmond was well before this.
I also talked to Damian Bowers, which shout out to him, by the way, for helping me out, and Nick Davis too.
Yeah, actually,
They
shout out to Damien too. He messages me after every podcast, tells me how good it is. He shares it. Thank you very much, Damien. I appreciate that.
Yeah, cool deal, cool deal. Shout out to those guys for helping both of us out.
Exactly.
Um, but it It's the thing I also noticed about the 88 season is the whole product, there's a lot of inconsistency. I have read and I have looked at that the video basically um didn't show the right uh part of the bracket. Like one truck will go out, like one race, let's just say like Casper and Carolina Crusher go out, but they show like Bigfoot and King Crunch. Well, Bigfoot and King Crunch was before them too,
Mm-hmm.
and they do a lot of inconsistency. I know, that's they're just trying to do a product that they tried to do back in the 80s, but I think also that they're trying to learn. Also, they have a big ESPN deal,
Yeah,
trying to bring this to trying to make this as professional as possible. Um, but when you're a diehard fan, you find that there's a lot of inconsistencies when the average Joe's like, "Yeah, monster trucks," and that's something that I think they learned later on and made some big pops in the later years.
exactly. One thing I will say here is I wish that some officials that may have been calling this show had as much enthusiasm and as much desire to call the show correctly as Army Armstrong and Richard Leake both did. You can clearly tell that they want and they are really invested in this product, especially Army. We know Army's going to go on for a number of years and become probably the best monster truck announcer, host, whatever you want to call them, in the world ever. Period. There's no one beating Army Armstrong as far as I'm concerned. Um, One thing that gets me though is you see all these inconsistencies in the officiating, and it's almost like you hear that old saying about when I get old and I can't see, I want to be a referee.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know. It still irks me about round one. Anyway, if you were the official in round one, there, sorry, I dislike your call. We go into the final round though. We've kind of been teasing it. USA 1 and Carolina Crusher. Interesting to see USA 1 in the left lane. The only thing that I can think of here is that yes, they had announced earlier in the event that Quicker Time would have the lane choice from the trucks in the previous round. However, USA 1 knocked out the number one qualifier. Was that rule in effect here at that event? That's something that we don't know. It's something else that can be left into the discussion here, Dan, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because we don't know. They do say it, but did it really happen? Was it something that they voiced over here? Is what I'm getting at.
There there could have been a number of things that could possibly happen. Maybe someone screwed up lane choice, or like some events that I've been to, the first to get there picks whatever they want. You know,
They
there
erased
could
the
have been.
lane choice.
Right, right. Like you said, this in round one there was some big time. I'm putting quotations because it's big time questionable calls that could have changed the impact of this event. Maybe your round. I mean, with the just showing off in Clydesdale, the 2-2 rule. I don't know later on in the event that would be affected, but because just showing off moved on anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But this final though, what happened if put Carolina Crusher in the good lane against USA 1?
Put him in the bad lane.
Carolina Crusher could have swept that weekend.
Yeah,
And
Crusher. Honestly, if you throw USA 1 in the right lane, Crusher sweeps the weekend. There's just no doubt in my mind right there.
mm-hmm.
When just for interesting and discussion's sakes, I went back, I rewatched the semifinals, and I clocked both of these trucks. USA 1's pass was a 13.66, and Carolina Crushers was a 12.16. It's almost a second and a half difference right there. Yet, for some reason, again, USA 1 has the favored lane.
And also a side thing, Josh. Also, you also put in the notes too. Um, the finish line wasn't at the past the cars. I think the finish line's what, two cars
The
out.
eighth and ninth car on the second stack was where the finish line was. This race, though, the closest race of the night, and probably one of the better races of 1988 right here between Crusher and Litzow in USA 1. Crusher, again, smooth and consistent, smoothest truck in that right lane without question all night long. Gary Porter keeps about a half a truck length distance between him and USA 1, but I think where he lacks is in the motor department. USA 1, everyone knows, has a giant motor in it compared to most other trucks out there. And Everett Jasmer, Rod Litzout, they get the win here on day number 2, which is Rod's second race ever as a monster truck driver.
His driving suit was an aviation jacket.
Yeah, exactly. And he's going to need that aviation jacket when they go to Milwaukee in a couple of years. But anyway, anyway, we go on here. Army, this is your first time driving this truck, and you out and beat the best in the country. Congratulations to you. Rod Litzout, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't do it without everybody behind him. The truck is designed to do this. We're going from here. This is a good start. What he's referring to is they're going to go on from here to compete for the 1988 World Championship, which, hey, spoiler alert, USA 1 eventually wins over Bigfoot at Freedom Hall later in the year, which is an event that I'm probably going to cover here on the Retro Monster Truck Review at some point. Cheech, though, I got to ask you, start to finish, what'd you think?
It was for me, I liked it. Looking back on it, it was something that you would see in the future of TNT racing. Plus the interviews too. Before the finals, they did a little interview with Rod and how nervous he was, but I liked it because it was you're seeing that transition of, okay, we have these show trucks, but now we can race them. And don't get me wrong, there's other events beforehand where they raced them and stuff like that, but not like this.
Not to this capacity and not to this track length.
Right. Which would be a common track that you would see on an outdoor TNT event, would be these long 3 obstacle or 2 obstacle, mostly 3 event. I think Nashville 89 was kind of typically like that track, and Nashville 88. But for me, there was a lot of storylines, a lot of turning points. Maybe people don't realize about it, like I said. And from Hampton on, I think there's a lot of history changing, a lot of history made.
Yep, I agree. One thing that I will say about this event, it's the reason I rated it a 7 out of 10. Main reason, though, is for the production value here. The questionable calls and racing it brings the broadcast down for me just a little bit. But what I love and absolutely love about this event is that if you were a fan of TNT Motorsports growing up, you remember that Dennis Anderson interview. You remember the interviews after the event, after each race with Gary Porter, Rich Hoosier, Rod Litzout's interview. You remember those characters being introduced to you through Army Armstrong and Richard Leake in this broadcast. The production of this event is, as always with an ESPN-style broadcast, second to none, in my opinion. They did an excellent job bringing us the product that we wanted to see, and that is the reason that I rated this a 7 out of 10.
I agree. 7 out of 10.
Yeah. I mean, if they had just done a couple of things different, this event easily goes to either a 9, possibly a 9.5 for me. Just from production value alone, it would have brought up the racing as far as I was concerned. This right here, though, with the inconsistency of the Clydesdale call, the weird choice of lanes in the final, I don't know, those two things, me as a purist race fan, it just throws me off a little bit. One thing I will point out here, though, Carolina Crusher did win day number 1, and day number 2 he got second. We'd established earlier Gary Porter was a very consistent driver. It doesn't get very much more consistent than that, and I'm still going to stick by with what I said last week about Gary. He is the Mark Martin of monster truck racing.
Mm-hmm. And also another thing I would agree on the 7/10 is also the hype that they give a truck. Sorry, even though it's TNT's Stomper truck, no offense, they hyped it up a lot, and then when it came down to, okay, let's see it run, they had to kind of switch gears on it. So that was another thing I agree about the 7 out of 10 was, they knew, they knew the truck was out. So, I know they're trying to push that truck because it was their sponsored truck. A lot of Mike Witt and all them did a lot of stuff outside, behind the scenes of the displays and stuff like that with the Stomper truck. But one thing I always thought they could have, I think they had a lot of good parts in the basket, but I don't know if they put it together right, or the way I'm saying it is they had good trucks.
I agree. They had good trucks. One thing that I think that they focused on too much, and I think you might agree with me here, is top end speed.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get out of the hole quite as well, and I think that cost them in events against, say, Bigfoot, USA 1, Carolina Crusher, Gravedigger. Every time it would get to those trucks, they couldn't run them as hard. But say Stomper races, no problem won here. Stomper wins every day.
Mm-hmm.
There's one event that I can remember, and I can't remember the exact place that it was located at, but I remember I think was it the final was Mad Dog and Stomper?
There was a couple finals. I don't know where. Charlotte? I don't know.
I'm trying to remember the event. I think the event that I'm thinking of, and I may be wrong, is the event where you hear Dave Grimm make that famous "oh" call, and Stomper bounces and loses every flag off the truck.
Oh, Hamburg, '87, Hamburg, okay. New York.
I want to say that final was Stomper and Mad Dog.
Yes.
And that was the only time I ever saw Stomper get out of the semifinals, ever.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple shows in '88 with the Stomper 1 truck. I think one of them's in Nashville, and another one, that Louisville show, the '88 one. You saw the strength if it wasn't for that bad bounce that Stomper had when he rolled over, you actually saw how strong that truck could have been if everything was running in 8 cylinders. But the event in Nashville in '88 was a long track. And like you said, I think another show was Charlotte, West Virginia. I mean, Charleston, West Virginia. They had that Linko. They were trying to experiment with the top fuel or transmission, air shifting. So at the start, they had an issue. But at the end of it, they were hauling the mail. Mm-hmm. One event, like I said, in Nashville, he had a rough start, and the guy was ahead of him. But at the end of the track, he just flew by him. And Stomper had the horsepower, tons of horsepower. I just don't know what, they wanted to try something different or what was going on. But if they would just stuck to the norm that any other truck ran, I think that truck would have been very dangerous if it was running on all 8 cylinders. When I said that, I mean, no problems and no issues, everything good. And I always thought the closest race that I saw Stomper running like that was at Louisville '88.
Yep. The Louisville '88. We'll save that for another discussion down the road. Until then, though, guys, this has been the Retro Monster Truck Review. Be sure to tune in next week. We're going to have my buddy Colby Marshall on the show, and he's going to actually talk about one of his favorite events, Houston USHRA 1987, the Bigfoot Barefoot Showdown. We might have that discussion from a previous episode where I kind of argued about what was the race of 1987. Well, Colby's going to tell me why this was his favorite. Anyway, then, thanks to Dan for joining me. This has been the Retro Monster Truck Review. Always remember, rubber side down, shiny side up.